Hi everyone. So my name is Francesco and this week ConsenSys is at DevConnect in Amsterdam and we're meeting with many of the core devs behind the merge. So today we're going to catch up with few merge experts, Ben and Justin, on what to expect on the leads of the biggest change in Ethereum since the launch in 2015. Cool, great to have you, welcome. So with me this morning, as I mentioned, we have Justin Drake from Ethereum Foundation and then Edgington on what's new in ETH2 fame. And I love the blog, by the way. And you guys want to introduce yourself and just mention what you guys doing on the merge side.
Right, so I'm Justin Drake. I've been at the Ethereum Foundation for 4.5 years now. Initially, I used to do research and help write the spec, but now to a large extent, the research has been done. So in terms of the merge, I'm helping coordinate a little bit of the security effort behind it. We've hired a security team recently, and we're working with fuzzers. And I'm also starting to think about attacks that could happen after the merge, because there are still things that we need to patch, and it's going to be a whole process over several years.
Very cool. And you're famous in the ecosystem. You don't almost need to introduce yourself. Ben?
So the day job is product lead for Teku at ConsenSys. Teku is one of the Ethereum proof-of-stake clients, and it's been in production for 18 months or so, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. But as you mentioned, I also do a lot of writing, education around the future of Ethereum and the technology that's behind it.
Cool. Yeah, thanks for the intro. So now there are three primary circles on the conversation around the merge. So the first, and we actually discussed a little bit this morning in your colleague's interview, was this debate on proof of stake, where we reduce this carbon footprint on Ethereum network. The second was more technical debates on proof of work and proof of staking, issuing ranging from crypto econ and network participation, client diversity, and more topics about scalability. And then there is a third one that we actually didn't really spoke a lot about, but that's the meme around the sound and secure money. And both crypto Twitter and the mainstream audience were talking over the past few weeks. I know you, Justin, have been talking about this for 1 year now, for even more. And I think we should definitely following up this space more closely. So let's actually start with some basic concepts, right? How do you think about money, right? I remember you were mentioning, this candidacy, monetary premium. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Right. So money is an asset which has various properties, and if you have these various properties, then you're essentially a money candidate. So these properties could be divisibility, transportability, durability, fungibility. And maybe a good thing to think about is a cow, for example. A cow is an example of something which is not money. It's not easily divisible, durable, or transportable. Now, once you have these basic properties and you're a money candidate, you can ask yourself, what is it that makes you a money? And here, we talk about monetary premium. It's this idea that society somehow manages to imbue this asset with this magic economic energy. And one way to achieve that is through a selling point, some sort of distinguishing factor which makes this asset special versus all other assets.
Sounds good. So let's take the next step is basically what do you think about sound money, right? This kind of metal versus fiat that you're always speaking about.
Right, so there's this meme which basically started with gold and silver and has been adopted by Bitcoiners, which is that money is sound if it can't be debased. And the reason we have the word sound is because gold coins used to make this characteristic noise. If you put a gold coin on your finger and you use another coin and you tap it, it goes ding! And that was the characteristic sound that gold coins made. And it was kind of a metaphor for money that can't be debased.
Okay, nice. So we have these two basic concepts. So what then is ultrasound money?
Right. So Ethereum is going to be in a position where not only will the money not be debased arbitrarily, but instead the supply will be decreasing. So while, for example, for gold, there's a fixed amount of gold on Earth, and same with Bitcoin, there's a fixed amount of Bitcoin on Earth. So we have this cap supply. And if we are able to be in a position where the supply decreases, well, we must be somehow better than sound money, and hence the kind of tongue-in-cheek joke, ultrasound money.
Cool. So then tease us with how the merge make Ethereum an ultrasound. So it decreases the supply of ETH, right?
Right. So when you look at the supply of something, you need to ask yourself two questions. One, what is the issuance?
Mm-hmm.
So the issuance is the creation of new tokens. And then the second question is there a mechanism to destroy some of the tokens? And it turns out that on Ethereum, we already have, right now, a mechanism for the issuance to go down. That's called the fee burn mechanism. So every time you use Ethereum, you pay a transaction fee for the block space, and part of that, the majority of that, about 80%, gets burnt. In terms of the issuance, this is basically the security budget, which is given to ConsenSys participants to secure Ethereum. Now, in the context of proof of work, today, the issuance is 13.5 thousand ETH every single day. And right now, we also have issuance for proof of stake, which is on the order of 1.5 thousand ETH per day. So combined, we're issuing today 15,000 ETH every single day. But post-merge, we will only have the proof of stake issuance, which is 10 times less than today. Not only do we have this massive reduction in issuance, but we'll be in a position where the burn, the amount of ETH that's destroyed every day, is almost certainly going to be greater than the issuance. And the reason is that since the burn started, we've been burning on the order of 5,000 ETH every single day, which is much more than the 1.5 that proof of stake is issuing.
That's very interesting. Actually, the concept that you're speaking about is not new, right? You have the buybacks option. You have basically like the quantitative easing for bond issuance, right? So it's something that is already existing. We basically reducing the shares that are standing or dollars in circulation, and basically like what happening is those two will be more valuable afterwards. So basically, I guess like most folks here that is hearing the conversation will be familiar with this. So like basically what my question is, how post-merge will Ethereum take liquidity out of the system?
Right. So if by liquidity you mean supply, then that's the burn mechanism.
Yes.
If by taking out liquidity you mean extracting kind of this economic value to pay for something,
yes,
then that's actually through issuance. And that's the way that it works basically is that the protocol just mints tokens out of thin air and gives them to the miners as an incentive. And what happens here is that we're basically issuing new tokens and diluting everyone who's holding tokens. And so that's a way to kind of extract value out of the network and give it to those who are securing the network.
Yes, I think also like part of the conversation was also like the main three concepts were also about staking fees and collateralization. Can you talk me through what will happen at the merge, very basically?
So we are changing the security mechanism, which secures the Ethereum blockchain, which is very important because there are many financial instruments built on top of it and other applications which are very valuable. So the mechanisms we talk about, proof of work, proof of stake, they are all about security. And it's to do with what's the cost of attacking the network. Okay. So under proof of work, the cost of attacking the network is acquiring enough equipment, ASICs, specialized ASICs and GPUs and so forth, and burning enough electricity to overwhelm the existing security. Justin mentioned, to put it in other terms, we're paying 5 million Ether per year to secure the current Ethereum network, and that's issued to miners, and they're spending it on hardware and on electricity, and they're having to sell that Ether to pay for that. So that's costing us $15 billion a year, and that's the cost of attacking the network. If you want to attack the current proof of work network, you need to acquire that much equipment and burn that much power. So we're changing that. We're moving to proof of stake, and we can talk about the reasons why. But one of the reasons is we get as good or better security for much less cost. So we will be for 10% of the cost half a million Ether per year, we will have as much economic security as Ethereum does today. So we cut down the cost of security by a factor of 10. So that's one motivation.
Yeah.
For me, the main motivation, however, and the reason I kind of got into this space in the first place is the much more imperative environmental considerations. In proof of work, all the miners are competing, they're burning this power all over the world. It uses as much as a small country to secure the network. And this is completely unnecessary. We have much better technology now. We can do the same job with 99.95% less power. So we can reduce the power usage of the network by a factor of 2,000 and achieve the same goal. And for me, this is a no-brainer. I mean, we have to do this because not to do so would be immoral.
Yeah, I think every time that we're discussing is always about like sustainability, scalability, and security, but we're so passionate about the sustainability side. And by the way, so you mentioned like the proof of stake and the proof of work. Just for the people out there, what are the big difference in 2-3 sentences?
So it's about the costs. In proof of work, if you want to be involved in the network and earn rewards, you have to buy equipment and buy electricity. Under proof of stake, you buy the underlying asset. So in this case, Ether, the token of Ethereum, and you put down a stake in the protocol, and that's your investment. So that then gives you a right to participate in voting for what happens on the network in terms of which blocks on the network are acceptable and so forth. So you get to build the Ethereum chain. So you're securing it in that way. And as long as at least half of the stake on the network is honest, then the chain is secure.
Got it. So, and you mentioned before something that's very interesting, because obviously this is not a binary progression, right? It's not a 0-1. It's a testing. And you mentioned before in your answer, like we have been testing it. And can you actually make us understanding when you're saying we are testing it? What exactly do you mean?
Well, this has been under development for a very long time. So like 5 or 6 years we've been kind of working on this and it's evolved over time. But finally, we settled on a design which we believe is practical and we can deliver. So about a year and a half ago, we stood up a thing called a beacon chain. That's the kind of name it ended up with. This is a proof of stake network which has been running for all that time. It's currently secured by about 11 million Ether, so I don't know, $35 billion worth of value. But today it doesn't do anything. I mean, it just runs itself. It does proof of stake on itself and it produces blocks, but it doesn't run any transactions. You can't run DeFi on it, or you can't, trade NFTs on it. It just sits there sustaining itself. Alongside that, we have the proof of work network, which has been running for 6 years or so. And this merge that we talk about, this is where we bring the two together. So the proof of work network, Ethereum 1, gets transferred onto this proof of stake network, merged into the structure. This is why we call it the merge. And then at that point, we turn off proof of work and it's gone forever.
Yeah, I'm hearing a lot about, the ConsenSys engine, right? And I just want to turn back to you, Justin. And, basically we're swapping this ConsenSys engine. Like, what should we think this about? Like, is that a fundamental change on how Ethereum is secured? I remember in a podcast, I remember Bankless or something like that, that you were mentioning like the function of cost of attack and the part of slashing. So you want to build on those kind of two concepts. I think that's might be useful.
Right. So to build on what Ben said, we're swapping the engine. And just to give like a metaphor, imagine a car which has this gasoline engine. So about a year and a half ago, we added a second engine running in parallel, which is maybe an electric engine. And this electric engine is much more efficient. For 100 miles, let's say, it only costs $10 as opposed to $100, let's say. But right now, the wheels are connected to the gasoline engine. And what we're going to do at the merge is connect the wheels to the electric engine and shut down the proof of work engine. Now, in terms of the advantages of this electric engine, the proof of stake, one, we've already mentioned the economic efficiency, meaning we get much more bang for the buck so much more security per unit of cost. And Ben mentioned we have 10 times less issuance, but then the question is, how do we measure security? And one of the metrics, the primary metric, is what's called economic security. Economic security is the amount of money that needs to be spent by an attacker to overwhelm consensus and attack it. Now, in the context of proof of work on Ethereum today, it's roughly $10 billion. And with proof of stake, today, it's roughly $35 billion. So not only do we have 10 times less cost, but we have 3.5 times more security. So it's kind of a 35x improvement over the status quo. But this is actually just, in a way, the tip of the iceberg. And the reason is that these engines, engines break down. It happens.
Of course.
And when they do break down, we want to be able to repair them. And it turns out that proof of stake has this healing mechanism, this repairability, which proof of work doesn't. And the reason is that if an attacker manages to break the engine of proof of work, they can repeatedly do the attack over and over and over again, and basically discourage anyone from really participating in even attempting to secure the network. On the other hand, with proof of stake, we have this mechanism called slashing, whereby we can precisely identify the attackers because they are cryptographically identified, and we can penalize them, basically remove their stake. And in doing so, we're in a position where we're left with honest players and the malicious players have left. And not only that, but we've also reduced the supply of ETH.
Of course. Yeah, it's like you're getting a lot of positive transaction. But Ben, is what basically like Justin said right now, is that the extent to security improvements? Because I remember like you were mentioning like this whistleblower rewards, the finality. You want to speak on those kind of like the three anti-correlation mechanism? I think that's quite cool stuff.
Proof of stake gives us a lot more levers to play with in the protocol. So one of the opportunities it gives us is around client diversity, a topic close to my heart as one of the kind of client developers. And what this means is that the network relies on multiple pieces of software. They're all doing the same job, but they're all built by different teams. And if one of them has a bug, has a failure, then the others can carry the network. So it adds resilience to what we're doing. And we have incentives in the protocol to encourage people to run diverse clients. And so if many people are running the same client software and there's a failure in that software, the penalties and the punishments are greater. So you lose more of your stake if something goes wrong with that client. So the safest option is to run, we have effectively 4 production clients currently. If they all have 25% of the share of the stake each that they manage, then the network is very resilient to client failure, and the people running those clients also have a lot of safety. So that's an example of one of the mechanisms. Finality, shall we talk about that?
Sure.
This is a really nice difference from proof of work protocol. So the idea is that we're building this chain of blocks, but what can sometimes happen in proof of work is that you can have what we call a reversion. So a block that you thought was there, containing transactions that you thought had executed, suddenly vanishes. It's a different block becomes the block that extends the chain, and the one that you thought was there gets orphaned or uncalled or whatever the terminology you want to use. So this means that, for example, an exchange can't really be sure that a transaction has actually happened. Now, what they do is they have a sort of heuristic, and they wait for like 15 blocks or 30 blocks in Ethereum, so you've got to wait this period of time. And you say, well, it's been around long enough, it's almost certainly not going to get reverted. But in an attack, it could be. In proof of stake, we have this concept of economic finality, where the network, after a period of time, can declare a block final. We will never revert that block. Those transactions are in the chain, they will always be in the chain, and we will never change them. And this is a really nice property. It takes a little while, it takes about 13.5 minutes, which is perhaps a bit longer than we'd like. And in future, we might do some work on that, but that's the current design. So you can you can be sure that there will be no rewriting of history ever, which is, or if there is, then the economic cost of it is massive. We're talking tens of billions of dollars to revert the chain.
Cool. No, that's very interesting. So basically, we establish how to move to proof of stake, right? Is doing a better Ethereum. Let's actually switch gears a little bit, because the entire kind of panel topic is about ultrasound money too. And Justin, so you have been like evangelizing this metaphor about that we heard before about economic energy. Do you want to talk us a little bit? Well, what is that, and what is this metaphor about?
Right, so you can think of money as economic energy, and it can be used to fuel the engine, through issuance, also through transaction fees. You can also think of the battery analogy, right? So energy can be stored, and really in the context of Ethereum, each ether is the equivalent of one battery cell, which stores energy. And then you can ask yourself, what are the economic properties of this battery? So one thing you can look at, for example, is changes in supply. And it turns out that when you're increasing the supply, you're basically increasing the number of cells. And these cells start off empty. They call these empty cells. And the property that they have is that the energy in the existing cells will kind of flow into the empty cells until they all have the same amount of energy. And so basically that's how issuance kind of dilutes all the existing holders of ETH. And then the opposite happens. When you remove these cells. The energy that used to be in the cells that was removed is now being spread back into the other existing cells. Now that these operations around supply, they affect the charge of each individual cell, but they don't change the charge of the overall battery. And so if you want to look at the battery level, you kind of need to take an exogenous view, and you need to look basically at supply and demand within the market. And one of the very powerful things to create demand is basically to use Ether as a collateral money. And there's kind of these two main uses of ETH as collateral. One is staking, and the other one is in the context of DeFi. And here in the context of DeFi, the collateral gives you economic bandwidth. It gives you this resource that you can use to create liquidity, for example, with stablecoins. So if you want a decentralized stablecoin with the best-in-class security, then what you do is you take Pristine collateral, the native Ether asset, and then you take out debt, for example, DAI in the context of Maker, and ta-da, you have your decentralized stablecoin. Now, one of the things that you can do is try and project what will be the demand for ETH as this collateral asset. And you can look at, for example, the APR. And if you plug in reasonable numbers, for example, if you assume that the end game for the APR will be, let's say, around 3%, and then it turns out that roughly half of the ETH supply will eventually be used for staking. So the supply of ETH right now is 120 million. That should go down until it reaches an equilibrium, maybe around 60 million, so half of today. Half of that, 30 million, will be used as staking. And my rough guess is that half of that will be used as collateral in the context of DeFi. And so really you have a money which is optimized to be a collateral asset. And one of the properties that you want of a collateral asset is that its value kind of goes up over time, which is kind of the opposite of a debt money. There's basically two types of money. There's collateral money and debt money. So deflation, where prices go up, is terrible for debt money. And the reason is that if you take out a debt in a deflationary money, then you take the risk of default. Because if you have to repay in 10 years' time, but in 10 years' time the price is 10 times higher, then you won't be able to repay your loan. But on the other hand, the source of collateral, the collateral money, you want that to be one which is deflationary. That's a great thing to have. And so really we're going to be in a position where Ether, the asset, is optimized to be collateral money for staking, for DeFi, and because it has this really unique shape of its supply curve, which further kind of enhances the narrative around it.
Cool. No, I love really this metaphor. And I mean, you mentioned before, but basically just for repeating, like, so the merge is basically, in this metaphor, is very similar by swapping this diesel engine out of the car for an electric one, while we're doing 90 on the freeway, and actually the driver doesn't know it, right? Is that basically what you're saying, right?
Yeah, it's a little crazy, and you know, Ben can talk about like the coordination nightmare, but yeah, I mean, technically speaking, we have the two engines running, and the act of connecting the wheels to the new engine is very, very simple technically, but because we have you know, so many clients, we have 5 so-called ConsenSys clients, we have, you know, 3 or 4 execution clients. They each need to be compatible with each other, and we need to do so much testing because there's, you know, almost $500 billion of economic value sitting on top of Ethereum.
Very cool. Yeah. And basically, this engine API is basically what is doing the heavy lifting in the merge. That's super interesting. And just for the audience out there, when we're speaking about the driver, we're also like, you know, like we're also speaking about the developer out there. So the developer experience is not the one that is really changing, right? Because it's...
If we do our jobs well, nobody will notice, and except the miners. You know,
Yeah.
I mean, they will notice that it's happening. But the users of Ethereum, the developers on Ethereum, it will be seamless for them. One point in time will be on proof of work, and the next point of time will be on proof of stake. But everything just keeps running exactly as before.
Yeah.
So we're currently doing a big testing effort.
Yeah.
Clients are basically ready, all of the existing Ethereum clients. So we call the execution clients, which are like Ethereum 1 clients. We have the ConsenSys clients, which we've built in the last few years. They're basically ready, production ready, but we have a few months of very intensive testing ahead of us to make sure that it will be seamless.
For Ben, it's all about testing. I love it.
It's all about testing.
It's so great. Now, okay, cool. So we established this metaphor on how the system works, and now we're going actually to take this proof of work engine API out and replace with the proof of stake engine API. So Justin, you mentioned there are basically 2 types of full of this engine API, right? There is the issuance on one side, and there is the fees on the other side, right? So the merge is impacting issuance, and the EIP 5059, which was changed back in the day, impact fees. So my question is, let's start with the merge. So Ben, how does the merge impact the issuance?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it comes back to this security argument that we were talking about earlier. So basically, we need to give stakers only 10% of the Ether, the issuance that we give to miners. This is new Ether that's created out of the protocol, out of nothing, in order to pay for the security. So currently we're paying 5 million ETH a year to proof of work miners. We'll be paying about 500,000 ETher per year to proof of stake miners in terms of new Ether that's created for the purpose of securing the network. So tenfold reduction.
Cool, cool. Okay, so basically we're dropping issuance also by 90%. So Justin, how does this 5059 play in on the side, on the fee side, on the equation?
Right. So when you pay for secure block space, when you're making a transaction, you need to pay a transaction fee, and that transaction fee is split into 2 parts. One part is burnt, and that's roughly 80% of the transaction fee on average is being burnt. And that leads to scarcity of ETH asset. It's pressure towards the supply going down. And then the other 20% of the fees go towards the validators. And that increases incentives to become a validator, and therefore increases the amount of ETH staked, which increases the total security in the network.
Cool. Okay, makes sense. So let's actually go back a little bit where we stuck up in earlier, right? So that Ethereum remove liquidity by doing the different things. So we're doing the staking, the burning, and the collateralization. So staking means basically that you lock value to participate in the network, and it pays you an interest. Burning is basically like it's like similar what we discussed earlier about the stock buybacks, right? You have a structured mechanism to remove supply out of the system, and then the collateralization. So you post ETH as collateral to participate in DeFi, so you earn DeFi returns. So Ben, can you talk me through what the merge does to those three drivers on the value side? We can start with staking. Does staking become available like to more people post-merge?
It certainly becomes more available than proof of work mining. The reality is today, the original vision of proof of work mining and Bitcoin was one CPU, one vote. If you've got a PC at home, you can participate, but that very quickly became infeasible. And today you need specialized equipment, you need economies of scale, you need access to very cheap power, and people like you and me are basically excluded from this. There's no point me running a proof of work miner at home. It would cost me a fortune. And also the rewards are very intermittent. You know, I might mine one block every 5 years or something and get my rewards. So most of the time it's just cost. Proof of stake is much more egalitarian. You just have to have access to acquire Ether, the asset, which you can do in a decentralized way. I can participate from home. I am participating from home, running just a very small computer. And the rewards are effectively constant. Every 6 minutes I'm accruing rewards. And so there isn't this variance. I don't have to wait for years to get a payout. I'm accruing rewards, and everybody on the network is all the time.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So the fees, from what I'm understanding, they will remain unchanged, right?
Yes, that's correct. So transaction fees that you pay, the gas that you pay to run a transaction on Ethereum, the merge will have a minimal impact on that. That's not designed, it's not a scaling solution, so there won't be any significant change to gas prices.
And do you expect also, relative to the third point on DeFi products, do you expect a grow into like DeFi products?
So the platform, in as much as Ethereum becomes the most secure, most capable platform for DeFi, then absolutely DeFi feeds on DeFi, right? It's a self-sustaining ecosystem. So given a sufficiently secure and scalable platform, then of course it will grow. And we haven't really talked about scalability, but you know, that's all part of the picture as well, enabling roll-ups and other scalability solutions. And we've got a kind of whole roadmap post-merge on this stuff coming as well.
Cool. No, very cool. So Justin, can you help me connect these 3 points to the energy analogy, right? So Ethereum is a battery that is charged by movements in supply and demand, and the merge affect both supply and demand. I mean, let's start with the supply. Is that more about issuance and fees?
If you look at the engine and you ask yourself, you know, what feeds the engine, there's issuance and there's fees, and that's very important for the security. And one thing that I want to highlight is that these two sources of fuel for the engine are not created equal. Issuance is something that the protocol has extremely fine-grained control over. Like, you know, Ben mentioned that it's you can reduce the volatility, but not only can you reduce the volatility, but you can also have a predictable average, right? Mm-hmm. Because the volatility in the case of proof of work can be mitigated with pools, but one thing that cannot be mitigated with pools is the overall fee market. And what we've seen historically is that the fee market is extremely volatile. So during bull runs, for example, there's lots of fees being paid. During bear runs, lots of not many fees being paid. And so I kind of consider issuance to be grade A, the best-in-class fuel that you can give your engine, and fees to be grade B fuel because you can't really rely upon it. And one of the things that we've done for security is that we've made sure that the issuance is sufficient for the security of Ethereum long term. And so anything on top of that is kind of additional gravy, as it were, for the security.
Cool, makes sense. So basically, I'm assuming that the new post-merge staking and collateralization products will provide demand-side changes to the battery, right? So we're basically charging the battery on that side. Is that the right way to think it a little bit?
Right. So one of the very important things in terms of how much security we get is not only how much are we issuing from a nominal standpoint. Ben mentioned 500,000 ETH per year, but it's also very important what is the value per token, per ETH. And so we really want to be growing what's called monetary premium, because that's going to directly influence security. And by having best-in-class security, that then leads to more activity, which leads to more scarcity, which leads to more monetary premium, and you have this positive flywheel going on. In terms of things that can dramatically influence monetary premium is what's called the velocity of money. Right? So if you have money which is just being held out there and not moving very much, it's almost as if it's taken out of circulation. And so if you have a situation like gold, for example, where 90% of gold is just stored in vaults underground, well, because there's only 10% staking, then you could argue that maybe there should be a 10x monetary premium over the raw utility of gold. And this is actually what we've observed empirically. So if you look at gold, it has a $10 trillion market cap. But if you look at all the industrial uses of gold, we have gold in our iPhones, and we have gold in all the electronics, and we can estimate that gold should really have had a market cap of 1 trillion. And so you can ask yourself, where does this 10x premium come from? And to a large extent is around the velocity of most of the supply essentially going almost down to zero. And this is what using ETH as a collateral does. And there's two ways that you can use ETH as this pristine collateral. You can either use it in the context of staking, and you can use it in the context of DeFi. And my best guess is that we're going to be in a position where 70, 80, 90% of all ETH will be used as collateral, because that is what it's best designed, is like what it's best for. And if we are in this position, or if people believe that this is the end game, it's a bit of a recursive thing, then it will start accruing monetary premium, which then improves security, and then this whole flywheel continues and continues.
Cool. I think that's a pretty good spot to wrap up. I just want to give you guys an opportunity to shoot some key takeaways, something that we didn't touch on. I don't know. We can start with you, Justin. Anything that you wanna give to the audience today, just between us? I don't know, something that you wanna speak on it.
So I guess we can talk about some of the parallel efforts that are happening to the merge, and there's the so-called urges from Vitalik. One of the urges is the so-called purge, which is the idea that we can clean up a lot of technical debt, and in doing so, improving security. Another one of the urges is the surge, and the idea here is to try and increase the total amount of secure block space that we're providing, because it's all well and good to have ultra high grade World War III resistant block space if we can only provide it for 1 million people on Earth. We really want to scale it up to 10 billion people on Earth. And then another urge that is very important, and as a researcher is maybe the most relevant one, because it's the one in the most distant future, is the so-called splurge, where we have all the goodies. So two of the splurges that are worth mentioning is one, so-called snarkifying the EVM, which is this idea that instead of having to verify every single block individually the brute force way by rerunning every single transaction, you can have, for every block, a very short cryptographic proof that the block is valid. And not only does this improve security, but this is also going to improve scalability. Another interesting splurge is around post-quantum. So one of the long-term forcing function is quantum computers, which will break one of the tools that we use to design these blockchains, right? The two tools that we have in cryptoeconomics are one, cryptography, and two, incentives. And right now we're using, for the most part, pre-quantum cryptographic tools, meaning tools that have this algebraic structure which is amenable to being broken by quantum computers. The good news is that we have plausible replacements for every single piece of cryptography that we have on Ethereum, but there's going to be quite a bit of an effort to bring that to production.
Cool. No, sounds good. Ben, any key takeaway on maybe on testing or anything?
My takeaway is very simple, and it's happening.
Nice, that's good.
Yeah, I mean, I got into Ethereum 6+ years ago, and I was excited about proof of stake. I mean, that was, one of the things which gripped me about the future of Ethereum, and it's been a while. It's been too long, but we're there, and we're on the cusp, on the verge of delivering this thing. It's going to happen in months, and it's just exciting to be part of delivering this finally. And yeah, it's happening.
Cool. Yeah, I'm looking forward to read the next blogs on your blog around. But cool. No, I'm super excited. Everybody's excited about a more sustainable, secure, and scalable future. And just wanna some notes EF is providing a lot of good resources. You can see different tweets all around. You have Ben's blog on what's new on ETH2. That's super cool. And also we have a dedicated merge page on ConsenSys that we just built. So everything is kind of done to make people aware what is happening and being educating themselves on what to do as a developer. Although nothing much, but it's super interesting to be in this space. So thank you again for your time, and it was a pleasure to talk with you, and enjoy the time in Amsterdam.
Thank you, Francesco.
Thank you, Francesco.